Notorious, DC cocaine kingpin dies at 60. This is one of those urban legend stories that will go down in American history. We're going to talk about a piece of American history. It was a dark time in the country during that time. But before we get into all that, family, I want to ask y'all to click that like button, click that subscribe button, building this podcast brick by brick. I appreciate the listeners I've been getting on my past podcasts, and I want to keep y'all listening. This is the LG Experience. Welcome to Podcast Talk. I am your host, Mr. LG. Rayful Edmond dies at the age of 60. He had just recently got released from prison and was in a halfway house. And soon thereafter, he passed away. And when we look at some of these urban legend stories, some of this stuff is historical, and some of these stories are popular. There's plenty of vloggers that cover these type stories, and they cover, street level type activity, and they do a good job at it. Some of them do. And I want to look up the meaning urban legend really quick. And I do this live while I'm podcasting. I don't go by a script. I come straight off the hip. I write down my talking points, and I like to give my commentary on popular topics. So let's look up the definition of urban legend. Definition of urban legend. Okay. Urban legend, a humorous or horrific story or piece of information circulated as though true, especially one purported to involve someone vaguely related or known to the teller. So that's what I found on Google. And they usually like to label these type of people urban legends. And the crack era really popularized people who capitalized on that era. Basically, the cartels, they'll go find somebody, an enterprising young man in the hood, and basically start flooding the hood, with drugs, And drugs had been around long before the crack era. I grew up in the height of the crack era. I was around when it started and began, and when it started hitting American urban cities, urban neighborhoods, and I watched the decay that came along with that. So, but according to this story, a DC cocaine kingpin who spent more than 35 years in prison has died at 60, just months after his release from prison. The Federal Bureau of Prisons confirmed. So it's been confirmed that Rayful Edmond passed away. And, we've been hearing about him for so long. We watched the documentaries, watched people comment about it. And some people out there was enthusiastic about that because people like Rayful Edmond can be a martyr to this, to the street stuff and hustling, street hustling and having connects and making powerful moves and dealing with millions of dollars that's being generated out of, the street hustle. So, we've been hearing about this guy for a very long time. When he went to prison originally, it was big news. But according to this, Edmund operated 60% of the crack cocaine that moved through D.C. Prosecutors said at the time of his arrest, it was one of the most profitable drug operations in the nation. And he was sentenced to life. And later on, really stuff like this, you have to say, it should be a lesson. Like, what is it really worth? He spent 35 years in prison what is it really worth? And all the stuff he had to go through to actually get out of prison. And we're going to look into that too. Very interesting. And as I look into his background a little bit, and this is all public information, originating in DC, got caught. He came up during the 80s. You know, the crack epidemic started really kicking off in the 80s, maybe like 84, somewhere around in there. And it became back in those days, you used to call it rock cocaine. Crack, that's more like a government term, and people just got used to calling it crack. It turned into an epidemic. And DC during that time became like the murder capital of the United States. So, that gang brought a lot of terror in the neighborhoods, in urban areas particularly. Usually people from the suburban areas, they'd come into the urban areas and get their crack and go back to the suburbs. So it wasn't just people in the urban areas using this drug. You had plenty of people in suburban areas. You had people in high-ranking positions using this drug. During the '70s, they pretty much was snorting it. So it was like a party drug, and it originally started out expensive. So, eventually it got really really cheap. But allegedly, he had moved large amounts of cocaine. He ended up catching an indictment, and in the indictment, they say he bought between 1,000 and 2,000 kilos per week in 1992 from the Trujillo Blanco brothers, who were associated with the Medellin cartel. During the 70s and the 80s, pretty much in the 80s, because it was a spike in sales in cocaine when crack came along. And Colombia pretty much was producing all the cocaine. So a lot of those drug dealers back in those days were connected with the Colombians. Nowadays, the Mexican cartels basically took over the trade. They just pushing everything. Crack is not like the main drug of today. It's pretty much in the 80s and 90s, maybe the 2000s, but it's probably not the number one. It's the opioid epidemic right now. But he was largely responsible for introducing crack in the DC area. But that was what was said in his indictment. And of course, he was getting millions of dollars cash. And, he spent it on some of that stuff on expensive things. And when you catch these indictments, they gotta, once it hit the media, they blow it up 10 times what it is. And for them to put a RICO on you, they gotta prove that you running a criminal organization. It gotta be organized. And that will lead to other charges once they do that. And it's hard to beat those type of charges. And I've always had a stance that like somebody like Rayful Edmond, they shouldn't be spending like life in prison. And that's just what I think about that. It's just like Big Meech. He did all those years in prison. Yeah, he was selling a lot of drugs, but these guys are not violent. They're not known for dropping bodies and all that type of stuff. And it seems like this is a non-violent case. And when they say you introduce stuff, that's a very important word, because they're gonna blame it on you for the effects of you introducing whatever. In this case, it's crack cocaine. So when other people go out and do all kind of dirt and drop bodies and push more dope and do everything under the moon in the streets, they're going to look at you as the cause of all of that, because you introduced it. This is the effect of what you introduced. And when you're talking about these laws and catching cases, that stuff is hard to beat. They will use all that against you, even though you're not the one out there committing all the violence. So this looked like pretty much a non-violent case. So I don't believe that drug dealers, especially non-violent, should get life in prison. And that's what they gave this guy originally. They gave him life in prison, but once he got in there, he continued to deal from the Lewisburg Federal Penitentiary in Pennsylvania. He was hooked up with Dixon Dario and Osvaldo Cheeky Trujillo Blanco, son of Griselda, godmother Trujillo Blanco. We all know about the godmother, the Black Widow. She was notorious, you know. And I always say, if you run that type of lifestyle and you build up that image and you build up that type of character, especially when you get in the media, it sort of sticks with you. You know, I'm pretty sure this guy don't want to be looked at as the notorious drug dealer from Washington D.C. But now he's labeled with that, and he's passed away, and he's always want to be labeled with that. And it may be a movie about this guy later on, sometime on down the line. Eventually, if it's not a series already about this guy, but there's a lot of urban legend type people, very popular, that came up in these drug trades. Some of them been, depicted in movies and different type of series that comes on some of these app channels, like Prime, Netflix, and things of that nature. You got BMF that was out there. You had the movie Paid in Full with AZ, Rich, and Alpo. Some very popular guys during their time. You got old school people that's been depicted like Nicky Barnes, Bumpy Johnson, Frank Lucas. They've been on TV. You got other legends like White Boy Rick. They made a movie about that. But then, you got other people that's been depicted in documentaries and interviews and stuff like that. You got the Chambers Brothers. You got Supreme Team. Then you got people like Freeway Ricky Ross. It's another urban legend. You had rappers, basically copying off their name, off his name in particular. You had Young Boys Incorporated. Those are all popular type people, and they did have an effect on their community, and they had people that followed them. You had people that were fans of all of that. And some people may not look at it like it's a lesson. People look at it like it's motivation. These are cult figures when it comes to that street level type stuff. And this is one of those stories with Rayful Edmond. It's another one of those urban legend stories that's going to go down in history, and it's a part of American history. Now, I want to remind the audience, and while y'all at it, click that like button, click that subscribe button. It's the LG Experience. This is Podcast Talk. I appreciate y'all checking me out. On the flip side of this, he's also considered a snitch. And he still had to do 35 years, even though he snitched. They said that, he was still dealing once he got in there. And there was many of his family members also got caught up in there. His mother had to do time, and cousins and things of that nature, So there's a lot of people that went down with him. But he kept dealing while he was in there. And he caught another case. He catching cases while he in there. So he turned informant. And they say he got over 100 people locked up. He took down over 100 people. And it could be some type of conspiracy or something, because he passed away as soon as he got out of there. They say from a heart attack. But I'm just going to go with what's been reported, that he did die from a heart attack. He may have had some health problems before he actually got out of there. We had to see if more information come out about that. But He's also been labeled a snitch. It's a lot of these people that are cooperated with the government in some type of capacity. You know, they got YouTube channels. They'll tell you. You know, there's plenty of people that were major figures and they got millions of dollars. You know, and they want to get out of prison. You know, once you get in that behind them bars, you don't want to be behind there. It's like every man for themselves. You know? So Alpo was another guy that was down there in DC. You know, he became notorious when he got down there. He was down there pushing a lot of stuff, causing havoc down there. And like I said, some of these guys they gave up information, and some of them didn't. Some people stand on those principles of non-snitching, and it's people that's locked up right now doing long times in prison, got long prison sentences, and they proud of the fact that they didn't snitch or take somebody down with them. You know, that's just one rule that some people refuse to break. Especially when you're taking a whole bunch of people down. When it's like maybe 10 people on a case, on a federal case, it can go up to 30 and 40 and 50 people catching some type of charge, and all of them trying to get out of there. So, yeah, some people gonna talk. So I want to just get on here for a few minutes today. Drop something about Rayful Edmond. And this story been going on for since the 90s, and people just started putting, back then they had the video, the VHSs, and then people started putting DVDs out. Now people go straight to YouTube and they talk about stories like this. And at this moment right now, I want to give my 2 cents. It is better to be hated for what you are than to be loved for what you are not. So that's my 2 cents. Peace and love.